Hi, everybody. I'm Claire Cooley. This is the Creativity Show. Thanks for being here. Really appreciate it. I love these virtual visits with you. We're walking light on the planet while we're connecting, which is joy increasing in our lives. And that's what it's all about for me. I love to share what's the happiness, health, life enhancing creativity that has gotten me through my challenges in life, can help us all heal. And as we express our emotions, we stimulate our immune system. As we write, we're telling our stories, our truth, even if we're making it up, it's still coming from the inside out, which is good for us. It increases our resourcefulness that we can use to enhance our lives. A lot of these recent episodes have been about stenciling because though I've painted everything from insects to outer space, modern, lots of birds. I did the Book of Cranes, my first published book. I've done 26 warblers and wildflowers. I was the pollinator print of the year, not me, but one of my pieces of art in Pheasants Forever. I'm inspired by nature. It is my muse. It's a sanctuary for me, as is creativity. So that's what my work is full of. Though human beings are part of nature, most of my work is the not human touched natural world that I love representing and standing for, living in harmony with it and one another. I believe what we have in common is far more important than our differences, especially in this divisive time we're in. Let us share what matters the most: love and hope for the world, and connect on what we all share, which is we all want to feel safe, we all want to be respected, we all want to be loved and love. So that's what creativity is all about for me. I started very young to create instead of just consume. So I make clothes. Here's some t-shirts with the stencils. Here's art. We'll show you cards. I'm going to paint some art while we're listening to my pre-recorded audiobook from my memoir, Incandescence, Rising Above Darkness. I wrote because people asked me to, saying my stories helped them and would help others. There's 68 pieces of my art in between every chapter. Short story is some art, because art is what creative reverie was, what helped me rise above my darkness and can help others. So that's what I love sharing. And so that's what the Creativity Show is all about. And so I'm going to be doing art live while the stories are being shared. That's Bodhi, who just walked through the room, for anybody that's new, my son. And he asked me to work with him and named us Mother Son Productions. I'm so grateful and delighted that his technical expertise can help my work get out there. Nothing more gratifying than helping others. So that's what it's all about. I want to share the joy and healing and life enhancing of creativity with you. So first, just let's show them. So here's a little fancy stencil top with some jewelry that I put together from a big brooch that was way too heavy. I divided it into earrings and a necklace. I give myself permission to create and recreate anything I want in my life. So I have art and books and home decor and furniture and writing it, lots of stuff. And you'll see it. There's tours of our home that we restored ourselves and filled with creative expressions and projects. And here's some art that I did with stencils. I'm sharing the stencils in this series because I've heard so many times in my life people say they wish they were more creative. So stencils are a great way to get going, get started for people. So my designs are available, and Bodhi will tell you how in a minute, to help people.
It's on the bottom of the screen.
Oh, on the bottom of the screen. And so every virtual visit live stream, a new stencil design comes out for my Patreon members who, for their $5 a month fee, they get all the stencil designs, no extra cost. Other people, if they want to buy one, I guess they're $4 a piece. And so right now I think we have 12, 13 out, but they're going to keep coming. I've got almost 300 designs. So there's going to be a lot, and they're going to keep coming. So I have examples of using them for art that could be for your own home or a gift, for t-shirts or fancier wear or everyday wear. So, and then we'll show you.
That's the lady slipper that just came out today.
That's the new one that came out today, and every Monday and Thursday at noon Central Time, the next stencil design will come out. As we do the virtual visits, we put out a new stencil design every virtual visit, which is pretty exciting. And I love sharing the inspiration, and I love reducing my art to essence inspired by nature to help you feel confident and comfortable to start expressing yourself and exploring your creativity in how you design it. Here are some cards across this drawing table. And you saw some fine art. You saw some everyday wear t-shirts. I've got lots, I think over 100 pieces of clothes I've stenciled, some of them very elegant, some of them more everyday. And I've done bedspreads and pillows and walls and on vases and platters, and so many different ways we can use stencils. That's why, that's what I'm doing now with all the different artistic things I explore. I thought they were a great way to help you get started. So as we hear my stories from my memoir, we're going to do peaceful art. Some of my stories, if any of you have been here before, you know there's some difficult stories, rising above darkness, and some very dramatic stories. And the next couple stories have some drama and difficulty in them, possibly not appropriate. The first one for little kids, if there happen to be any with you, but I'd say that you know, the truth is difficulties happen in our human lives, and how we deal with it is what matters. How we rise above it, how we transform it into strength and wisdom, how we help others by sharing it, that's what matters. So that's why I wrote the book, and that's why I'm sharing the stories. So how we doing? Are we going to be ready to start sharing the first story in a couple minutes here?
As soon as you ask for it.
Okay. Oh, you can share it from out here.
No.
Great. You have to go in the office?
Well, I can share it around here. My apologies.
Okay. Are there any, if we have comments, we'll stop between the stories for them for a minute or two.
I
And
do have to go into the office to look at them, but I saw we got a smiley face, and we got on Twitch, we got somebody saying, I love your art. ZZX says, I love your art.
thank you.
And MMM put a smiley face on YouTube.
Thank you. Thank you. Back at you. And I love it's I love sharing it with other people, and it's deeply gratifying to Well, to be appreciated and to move or inspire, instruct others so they can enjoy their creativity. So I'm going to mix a few colors while we're getting the story going. And if we have questions, we'll wait till after the stories for the questions.
And Michael B. said, the art is so great in the book.
Thank you very much. It was very important to me to put the art between each story because, as I've said many times, creative reverie, the meditative, peaceful place of creating is what helped me get through difficulties in my life. So for me, I had to put the art in between the stories to share that. I had some big publishers say the stories stand on their own and the art should be a coffee table book, but we published it ourselves so that I could do it the way I felt was important and not compromise that. Share the art and the stories. They're an integral part of my life. So there we go. Sometimes you just have to be true to yourself, and we are going to make the next book with a small publishing house, an independent publisher that found us, and they're going to be amenable to me sharing it the way that feels right for me. All right, I'm ready for the story to begin. Okay, I'm ready. 23. The veils reveal what is concealed. It is said that Halloween is when the veil between worlds is thinnest. That Halloween I dressed as a woman from India, veils concealing my body and face. A darkness I had not seen before was revealed. There was a party in the house where I had a bedroom in the attic. My father had a room on the second floor. Everyone else in the house was close to my age, and they thought my father was cool and entertaining. He would have made a great charismatic cult leader if he could have managed his anger long enough to gain loyal followers. Many saw his ability to always be the center of attention as strength. I saw it as insecurity. That Halloween, my father was dressed in only a white cloth folded like a diaper, and he drank his beer out of a baby bottle. Everyone was dancing, and my father came toward me dancing in a lewd manner. He had never done this before. I was disgusted and moved away from him quickly, leaving the room. Never wanting to see my father as perverse, I thought perhaps he did not recognize me under the veils I was wearing. I was so upset by his inappropriate display of sexual interest in me, his daughter, that I went upstairs to my attic bedroom. When I got upstairs, two people were sitting on my bed talking. The woman I knew had a crush on me, and the man was a ballet artist who admired my free-form dancing. The three of us talked, sitting up in my bed with our heads against the wall until very late in the night, long after the music from downstairs stopped. After all was quiet, the three of us fell asleep on top of the covers with our costumes on. I was awakened by stomping footsteps coming up the stairs. The steps were loud, deliberate, and exaggerated for dramatic impact. My first thought was my father was probably playing one of his twisted games to get attention. He then began reciting Shakespearean-sounding morose prose. Just waking from a deep sleep, I do not remember the words. The tone was clearly meant to terrify, and the stomping was to portend doom. As he got to the top of the stairs, I could barely see him in the dark. The moonlight lit his silhouette through the attic window behind him, so I could see he was carrying a shotgun. As the other two woke and sat up, I could feel my male friend shaking next to me as my father slowly lifted the gun and put the sight in front of his eye. Aiming it at my head, he said, "Sit together so it only takes one bullet." I felt anger and took a deep breath. Strangely, I do not remember feeling fear. Perhaps growing up with danger close by, I had learned not to let it overtake me when I needed to be clear. I channeled my outrage into a calm, clear voice, saying, "How could you point a gun at me? I've only treated you with kindness. What happened to you? How can you be so confused? I am not afraid of you. I feel pity for you." Without another word, he put the gun down and acted like it was no big deal as he walked back down the stairs. Not until 20 years later did I begin to understand what happened that Halloween night when the veils were thinnest between the worlds and revealed what had been concealed for years. For the first time, my sister told me that when my father pointed a .22 rifle at my head that night, she had told him earlier in the day, "If you touch me again, I will kill myself." My father said, "Then I will kill Claire." She was 14, and my father had been sexually abusing her for 7 years. By her own admission, I had always watched over her, but still she did not warn me back then. I forgave her and saw that she had lost the value of her own life by the assaults, so how could she value mine? The veils revealed what had been concealed. Love and hate, life and death, good and bad, can all get twisted together. May we all untangle the confusion and let our dark places get the illumination they need to be seen and healed. May all our concealing veils fall away. May we find the courage to see what needs to be revealed. Well, as I've said during my virtual visit live streams, I wrote these stories and recorded this quite a while ago, so it's given me this perspective time to hear them again, and it's very powerful. It's very elucidating. It can help any of us. I say writing is free therapy. It's a way we can express anything and everything that we need to say, to heal, to learn from. And I highly recommend it. I've been journaling since probably I was 14. I didn't read a book till I was 21 years old, so I've been writing longer than I've been really reading. So I have my own perspective, and we all do, no matter how normal or different our upbringing. Yes, I hear you.
On YouTube, MMM says, "Great story, very profound imagery in your words."
Thank you very, very much. I appreciate that. It really is a whole nother level of healing. I call it not regretting even the regrettable things that happen in our lives, by using it to grow and strengthen and to help others. Gives it a higher purpose, gives it a positive outcome, and that's a real healing. Okay, I'm ready for the next one if you are.
Yep, I shall begin it.
24. Deported, transported. On my way to a remote island off the west coast of British Columbia, I got deported from Canada, which oddly turned out to be the best thing that could have happened. I would not have thought traveling with my father was a good idea if I knew that he had been molesting a child for years, or that he set me up to be raped by his barroom buddy, but I did not know these things until years later. When I agreed to go to live on Valdez Island with him, the worst thing I thought might happen would be isolation. I've always loved being close to nature and serene environments, and had an enormous ability to stay inspired creatively. Solitude is fine with me, in fact, usually preferred. So I imagined it would be a fine situation because I had no idea of the danger that he had hidden from everyone. Looking back, it is a wonder I survived and can write this now. I have no religion because I see how it divides people instead of bringing them together. Most believe their beliefs are correct and the other people's are not. I believe what spiritual beliefs have in common is what matters, and that is love, truth, and compassion. These are the principles I believe in. Maybe because I believe in these things, this is what is true in my life. Perhaps there is a benevolence in the universe that watches over me because I believe there is. Could this loving, invisible force have orchestrated my deportation, transporting me away from danger? As with all the deepest questions I may ponder, I may never have an answer. Certainly, I've gone through some very painful stuff, but all of it has made me more understanding, tolerant, broad in my scope, so I do not regret any of it. Somehow, I have come through much without losing hope. Perhaps this is proof enough of an invisible innocence and ineffable love. I am grateful that somehow I did not end up on a remote island with my pedophile father. Instead, the border guards searched his vehicle until they claimed they found a teaspoon of marijuana seeds. How did I know to immediately claim they were mine? Did I see it as an escape from the danger I had not yet consciously known was there? Do I have an invisible guardian watching over me, giving me a way out? Do I have common sense that told me to say they were mine in order to be taken away from the harm that certainly would have been in my future if I continued to be with my father? Most likely, I will never know how this event happened or why my instinctive immediate choice was to say it was my trunk they were found in, but I do see how it saved me from peril, and I am grateful. Because I said the seeds were in my trunk, they arrested me. I hated the feeling of being locked behind bars under someone else's control, but somehow I was confident that I would be fine. The sheriff's wife brought me a huge plate of fresh vegetables when she heard I was a vegetarian. I thanked her even though I was not hungry. Later, when she came to pick up the tray and saw I could not eat any of it, she came back and pretended to be washing the walls just to keep me company. I was too upset to speak, but it was comforting that I could feel her concern. A little later, I was brought before the judge in the same building. He never looked at me, but kept his eyes on his desk, shuffling papers. I felt he did not want to be swayed by seeing my youthful innocence. I pled not guilty because I believed the guards put the seeds in my trunk to keep us out of Canada. I did not blame them for disapproving of my father. He made no attempt to be acceptable on any level ever. His long hair and full beard, hippie clothing, in a truck with a homemade shell covered with paintings by my brother of plants that looked like they grew on another planet. Everything about my father and his truck stood out as anti-establishment. He telegraphed his disdain for anything conventional. I wore only my own handmade moccasins and baggy beige clothes. No jewelry or makeup, with my hair long and straight the way it grows naturally. I dressed that way in an attempt to call no attention to myself. My desire to be invisible only made me stand out. Most thought I must have been a member of a spiritual community no one had yet heard of. Me claiming the seeds were mine threw their plans off, and no one knew what to do. Without my knowledge or approval, my father called my brother, who paid the $300 fine, and the Canadian guards took me to the border and said I would have to walk across the border to the American side. My father was not there to see me off, nor did he give me any money. I had only the handmade clothes I was wearing and an over-the-shoulder bag containing my bamboo flute, journal, a pencil, a small knife, roasted soybeans, dried nuts, and fruit, and $12 cash. When I got to the guard on the American side, he insisted on getting me a ride. And when a safe-appearing couple crossed, he asked them to drive me south. I was too traumatized to speak. They were sweet and stayed silent along with me. I asked them to take me to a gas station at the edge of town. There I waited until a single mother came in for gas and asked her for a ride. I drew with her children and kept them happy while she drove. Mothers would always offer me food and shelter. In one woman's house, she left her kids with me while she went shopping. I would clean, cook, repair anything I could while watching over the kids. None of the kind people wanted me to leave, but I needed to get back to my mother. She was the only person I felt I could tell my truth to, and I needed to speak about what had happened to heal. Only once in the almost 1,500-mile journey from Creston, Canada, to my mother's house in Southern California did I stand by the road hitchhiking. In Eureka, there were so many hitchhikers, I had no choice. So I made a cardboard sign with a drawing of the Golden Gate Bridge and stood at the end of a long line of hitchhikers with the huge sign in front of me so no one could see me. I politely turned down a number of rides. No women ever stopped. I accepted a ride from someone I thought was a gentleman. He was Dutch and called me his nature girl. He did a lot of talking, and I listened as he took me all the way to my mother's house. I arrived with the same $12 I was deported with and transported back into serenity. It is a very, very interesting experience to hear these stories from my past, and my own voice reading them. I feel like it's me, and it's me viewing me from some place very distant, and I feel even the stuff that's hard to hear, I feel at peace with, which is kind of a wonderful testament to we can heal anything if we are honest and open. So I think that's a beautiful thing to share. Yes, I'm available.
So on YouTube, we've got a few. DBC on YouTube. Oh no, you got arrested for that? That sucks. Watching you do your art is very calming, by the way. Thank you.
You are very welcome. And I love the juxtaposition of the dramatic, difficult stories and the calming creativity, and showing that we can rise above and turn it into something beautiful. Like I like to say, turn our um, adversity into advantage through art. All right.
There's a question that we'll save for the after the stories,
Okay.
right?
Well, you can ask it now so that in case they have to go somewhere, they get an answer.
So TLG on YouTube said, "How many miles did you hitchhike?" Wow, that is a beautiful story.
Well, I hitchhiked from that trip from Creston, Canada to um, Anaheim, California. So I don't know how many miles, but it was a lot. And that's not the only time in my life I've hitchhiked. I do not recommend it, especially now in this world, and especially for females. Um, but I had to do it to get my strength back. Earlier stories in my book, I got molested at home where I thought I was safe in my family home. And so to get my strength that I could take care of myself in this world, I could see what's around me and keep myself safe, I had to really put myself out there. But I don't recommend it. I want to be perfectly clear about that. And if you have to do it, I have a story that talks about it. The technique I developed is never get in the car if they're in a hurry. Don't get into business deals. Don't get into relationships. Don't get into friendships if they're in a hurry. Their hurry is probably trying to hide something. So if people wouldn't talk to me long enough for me to feel comfortable before getting in their vehicle, I just let them go. One thing that all criminals have in common, almost all criminals, there are no absolutes, is they don't want to get caught. So they want you to get in before anyone sees you getting in their vehicle. So if you have to hitchhike, if you have to put yourself out there for some reason, you're the only one that's going to take care of you. So make sure they're safe before you get in the car by asking as many questions and seeing how they handle you taking your time. Okay. Yes. Story number 24, Owl Eyes. When I returned to Duluth for a visit and decided to stay, I had trouble making friends, and I could not understand why, so I knocked on Kay's door to try and find out. In order not to lose the courage to speak my truth, I decided to blurt it out as soon as she opened the door. As soon as I saw her backlit in the doorway, I said, "Did I do something to offend you?" We were both stunned and silent until I continued, "If I have, it was unintentional, and I would like the opportunity to apologize for whatever I did to offend you women in town." "No," she said, "you haven't done anything." "Then why won't any of you talk to me?" "Well," she hesitated for a while and continued, "'cause nobody trusts you." "Why?" "'Cause you're pretty. Nobody takes you seriously." I thought that was what men did. She laughed and continued, "We figure 'cause you're pretty, you are taken care of by a man." "I've never been taken care of by a man. I don't have one single piece of jewelry, clothing, or any other kind of gift from a man." "Yes, but you could. So let me see if I understand this. Even though I don't have or let men take care of me, I could. So that is enough reason for you all to ostracize me?" "Well, that is certainly open-minded and big-hearted. Maybe I was wrong about wanting to be friends with you guys. Perhaps you're not as interesting as I thought you were." She got a kick out of my candor and started laughing. which got me laughing, relieving my nervousness. We laughed until our bellies ached. Then she looked at me with tears in her eyes from laughing so hard and said, "Fuck 'em, it ain't your fault you're pretty." We started laughing again as she pointed at my baggy handmade colorless clothing covering me from head to toe, saying, "You sure don't try. You look like a nun." She stopped laughing and her face turned sad. "It really isn't fair," she said apologetically. "It's okay," I said. "No, it's not, and it isn't all of it. We don't trust you because you don't gossip." I was shocked and said, "I'm the one you should trust because I won't be talking about you when you leave the room." "Yes," she said. Realizing what time it was, she said, "I've got to get to work." As we descended her apartment stairs quickly, I said, "I figured out today what I'm going to be for Halloween tomorrow." "What are you going to be?" "I'm going to be a bunch of grapes made out of purple balloons. And you?" "I'm going to be a snowy owl." A moment later, we heard a resounding bang against the stairwell window. We looked at each other and ran down the rest of the stairs without a word. When we reached the alley, we saw a snowy owl standing perfectly still on a fence post about 6 feet away. I froze, and she touched me softly on my shoulder without a sound and backed away, leaving the owl and me. The owl was facing away from me, and without moving anything but its head, it turned completely around and looked straight at me. Terror rushed through my body for a moment, and I held my breath. A voice in my head said, "There is nothing to fear," and I began to breathe again. The little white owl looked into my eyes, into me, through me. I felt its gaze like the wind passing through me, as if I was no longer solid. We looked at each other without moving for what seemed like an hour. Time stood as still as the snowy owl and I did. My fear transformed into awe. I did not move until the brilliant white owl turned its head slowly forward and flew away. Later in the night, Kay called me to ask, "What did your feathered friend say?" I answered, "Everything," without a single word. Then she asked what I was hoping she would. "Would you like to join me on Halloween? But you have to promise to slow up on the gossip a little," she said with her adorable giggle. She picked me up with her purple balloons tied all over her body and matching purple tights and face paint and one huge green leaf on top of her head. I was wearing a white, knobby sweater and knit hat that fit around my face and tied under my chin to cover my hair. I tucked little feathers around my face and put black lines around my eyes. I wore brown tights and brown gloves sticking out of the end of my feet with 3 fingers of the gloves stuffed with tissue paper to look like bird feet. The bar she drove us to before the party was full of loud longshoremen dressed up like longshoremen. I sat facing forward at the bar, hoping no one would notice me. I have never been comfortable in bars. I heard some guys behind us talking about the bird at the bar. Then I heard a man come up from behind me and slap a quarter on the bar, saying, "Play the jukebox, girlie." I stared straight ahead without moving. I did not want to dignify his disrespectful demeanor. He slapped a second quarter on the bar and said louder, "I said, play the jukebox, girlie." I turned my head, keeping my shoulders facing forward and my body totally still, and looked through him the same way the little owl looked through me. He looked terrified and backed up until he hit the wall. He felt his way along it without taking his eyes off me until he felt the door. He fumbled around until he felt the doorknob, turned it, pushed it open, and ran out. The bunch of grapes came over and said, "He was out of here like a stray dog when the dog catcher comes. What did you say?" "Nothing." Her purple balloons jiggled as she laughed, saying, "That snowy owl showed you how to look inside a guy, and he sure had something he did not want you to see. Okay. That story was very interesting for me to reflect on. I have never wanted to gossip in my life. I'm not going to say that I never have. I tried it, and it always felt like eating something greasy and unsatisfying and kind of like spiritual indigestion. And I never really wanted to because my mother was the kindest, sweetest, funniest, cutest, smartest person I knew. And she never said anything about anybody that wasn't helpful. She never gossiped, and she never competed. She was everybody's advocate, even people that maybe didn't deserve her advocacy. But anyway, so I decided not to gossip. And unless someone is dangerous, I try never to talk about other people. I tell my stories, but not naming people. And I have observed all these years later, it's still a problem. I hear women say, I just don't trust her. And why, I can ask, and they don't ever, often, they have no good reason. So I say, if a woman says that, it's jealousy. It's not, if they don't have a good reason for not trusting somebody and they don't trust them, that's just plain old self-organizing sexism. Women are taught to compete with one another, and I refuse to participate in that, and I'm proud of that. And all these years later, it hasn't changed much in the world. It's part of the reason I talk about it a lot. I say what I think needs to be said, whether people want to hear it or not. And so I'm often a woman that gets gossiped about because I say what I think needs to be said, whether people want to hear it or not. And I don't participate in competing with anybody else. I only compete with myself of yesterday. All right, is there anything to say before the next story?
On YouTube, MMM said, cute. I like the way you described your friend as a bunch of grapes. Haha.
Yeah, well, that was her costume. She had these beautiful balloons and all over her. She was an adorable bunch of grapes, and it was very fitting for her because she was just pure sweet joy.
And you got a question from Sumner on Facebook. You want to do that now?
Sure.
Sumner Madison on Facebook said, just curious, Claire, what gave your mother the most joy and how did that affect you?
My mother, what gave her joy was love, and she loved everybody. And so she always had some joy. She had terrible life-threatening asthma since her infancy. She was divided from her family, sisters and brothers, mother, to live with her aunt in Boston, who was always at work, or most of the time at work. So my mother grew up alone with life-threatening asthma. So I think that's part of the reason she was so enlightened, and kindness. And so being kind to people, figuring out something sweet to do for someone else gave her pure joy. Once I picked her up from the hospital after she'd not only had a life-threatening asthma attack, but she'd had her heart stopped. They had to restart it. And so she's now just getting out of the hospital. And I took her out to the park, Golden Gate Park, and sat her on a bench. It's where she wanted to go with me, and I got my skates out and I was skate dancing out there in the blocked off street, so there were no cars on it. And every time I'd spin, I'd look at her and she'd just look elated. And I came over to her and I said, "How come every time I spin, you look elated?" She said, "Because I feel it. When you feel joy, I feel joy." And I realized that's the same with me and my son, Bodhi, and anyone I love. And in fact, even the world, I feel for other people. I feel with other people, and my mother felt with everybody. And so she loved increasing joy in others, increased it in her. So there you go. Do we have time? Sure. Stevedores on the Unsalted Sea. Behind the Longshoremen's Hall at 5 in the morning, the Great Lake was ominous when I got in the extras line. Lake Superior is to be respected in any season. The depth of its cold can take the warmth of life out of a person in minutes. The unsalted sea is so vast it creates its own weather and does not warm up below the surface. Perhaps I would not have shown up if I knew what many said. I was the first woman among the longshoremen, the stevedores. But after my family came for a visit and the court gave me the choice of my 4-year-old nephew going into an overcrowded home or me taking responsibility for him, I became highly motivated to increase my income honorably. Keeping my head down, the 2 guys in front of me did not stop talking or pay any attention to me. They did not notice I was a woman under the many layers of men's clothing and steel-toed, heavy-duty boots with my hair tucked up under a Stetson hat. By 6 o'clock, there were 100 guys in the extras line. It was like a bar, everyone talking and nobody listening. Perhaps it was a strategy to keep warm, and it made it easy to disappear in the commotion. Hearing the stevedores were beasts and the work required a knife, I brought my best knife with a horn handle and a sharpening stone. Having something to do while waiting in the line on the bitterly cold morning seemed like a good idea. Knowing I would probably be the smallest person there, I thought having a good knife could make me look less vulnerable. The knife and I were very familiar, as I had cut a lot of leather for the handmade sheepskin coats and mittens I made. I didn't show up to liberate women. I showed up because the money was better than anywhere else I was willing to work. I had recently been hired at the Black Bear Lounge during the day, when the waitresses were wearing long dresses. But when I got home and opened the box containing my uniform for working nights, it had white lacy panties under a black skirt that did not cover my butt and black lacing across the low-cut top, so I quit before I started. When I brought the uniform back, I told the women in the office I found it infantile and humiliating. They said, "Don't worry, you have a cute body." I realized they did not understand, so I left the box on the desk. When my friend told me the shipyard was hiring women to load the boats, I thought it would be difficult but honorable work. He had not mentioned no women had shown up yet. When I got to the extras sign-up list, where non-union workers had to sign up, there were 3 names on it. Since I had listened to the 2 guys in front of me talk about broads, hockey, and politics for 2 hours, I knew their names. So I scratched out the name of the guy who had not been in line. I couldn't imagine CLARE being projected across the hall on the loudspeaker at call-out. So remembering my father wanted to name me Roxanne, I spontaneously signed in as Rocky. When I came back at 7 o'clock for the call-out, the dispatcher assigned the union guys to their boats. Then he read from the extras list top down, adding however many guys the day needed. Over the loudspeaker, the names of the 2 guys in front of me were called, then Rocky, followed by about 10 other names. All of a sudden, this gigantic man pushed people out of the way to see the sign-up sheet and yelled, "Who crossed me out?" He was well over 200 pounds, and everyone around him stepped back. He looked around the hall, shaking and ready to punch somebody. I thought he was going to pick the smallest guy in his vicinity and break his jaw. So I walked up behind him, just out of reach, and said, "I crossed you out." He spun around and noticed at the same moment as everyone else that I was a woman. His mouth dropped open, and there was an audible gasp in the hall. I continued, "I got in line at 5 o'clock this morning, and there were only 2 guys in front of me, and you weren't one of them. So I thought it must have been a mistake. It is unfair to the rest of us in the freezing cold line waiting our turn for someone who is not there to be third in line. So I crossed out the name of the guy who was not there, which apparently was you." No one said anything. No one breathed. He wanted to punch me so bad he broke into a sweat even though the hall was freezing. You could almost smell his brain short-circuiting as he tried desperately to figure out who to hit. A couple guys stepped up just in case he swung at me. Finally, the dispatcher said over the intercom, "We got things to do here," and everybody started breathing again. I tried to act like nothing out of the ordinary had taken place, even though I was terrified. Not having anticipated this reaction, I tried to play it off like no big deal, like I hung out in the longshoremen's hall with the guys all the time, crossing bullies' names off the extras list. Everyone was relieved when he stomped out of the hall yelling. The dispatcher finished reading off the list, saying, "Okay, you guys and lady, you know where you're supposed to go, so get going. You don't get paid for standing here." Most of the men stared as I walked by, but the more composed of the group at least closed their mouths. By the time I got to the boat, everybody knew a woman was coming. Even the foreign sailors were gathered around the railing, staring unabashedly down into the hold. My first day was the hardest all season, which I think was the intention of the higher-ups wanting to discourage females. So I was sent out on the twine bale boat. 2 20-pound twine bales were tied together in an awkward 40-pound shape that was impossible to carry comfortably. To lift them onto the top row of the pallet, I had to boost them with my thigh. I was solid black and blue from hip to knee the next day. Carrying the 40 pounds of twine in one hand threw my spine out of alignment, even when I switched back and forth, so I tried carrying one in each hand and moving slower, which felt better. The guys saw me struggle with the top row and offered to help me. I replied to every offer of assistance. "Thank you very much for the offer, but if I can't do the work, I shouldn't be here, so no thanks." Being the first woman felt like a responsibility heavier and harder than the twine bales. There was always someone watching me. By the first break on my first day, most of the guys had bet on whether my knife or the union guy's knife was sharper. One of the guys must have seen me sharpening mine in the extras line. He said to the guy who was always bragging his knife was the sharpest, "I'll bet the lady's knife is sharper than yours." I didn't hear his response, but I'm assuming it was something like, "No broad has a knife sharper than mine." Want to bet? About 30 guys came over with the oldest longshoreman who they appointed as the judge. They asked for my knife and held up both knives for everyone to see. Mine had a brilliant sheen and was perfectly clean, which they expected, but the size of my knife surprised them. First, the old man cut a piece of paper with the longshoreman's knife. Then he sliced through the paper like butter with mine. A gasp was heard, as there was no question my knife was sharper. The men started exchanging money with the guy who lost. Shocked by the outcome, he said, "I don't believe it, that's not her knife." To which I replied, "It's my knife, and I've made a lot of sheepskin coats and mittens with it." "I believe it," the guy who started the bet said, grinning. I contained any show of delight on my face by pressing my thumb on my sore thigh until my urge to smile passed, constantly feeling aware I was setting a precedent for any woman who followed. At lunch, I declined their invitation to go to the bar and have burgers and beers. All I wanted was to get off my feet for as long as possible. It was also very clear to me I wanted no opportunity for anyone to think I was flirting with anyone. Eating the healthy food I brought while I sat with my feet up was refreshing. Even walking up to the deck to see the water was more effort than I wanted to put out. I rested every chance I got. I was determined to keep up, knowing the slower crew got no break between loading each pallet. I did not want to be the reason my team got no breaks. I ate and leaned my back against the wall with my hat covering my eyes. After lunch, I noticed it was easier to keep up. Most of the guys had slowed down considerably, digesting greasy food and alcohol. During the afternoon break, a couple of guys pushed an old man toward me, saying, "Come on, sing it." The old man was embarrassed that they were pushing him, so he said sternly, "Okay, okay." "Hello," I said, watching his cheeks turn crimson, contrasting his white hair and gentle blue eyes. One of the guys shoving him said, "He wrote you a song." He looked down and began to sing. They called her Roxanne. They thought she couldn't do it, but they found out she can. She looks like a woman, but works like a man. It went on rhyming innocently as his voice cracked and trembled. "Thank you," I said, and bowed toward him, which made him grin. The guys all laughed. By the end of the day, I was the only one maintaining any kind of pace. Most of the guys started drinking beer at lunch and then switched to the hard stuff. They did not eat well or lacked sleep, and many had hangovers. I ate a healthy breakfast, lunch, dinner, and fig bars with fruit juice at every break while I rested with my feet up. One of the guys said, "Slow down, you're making us look bad." Without any alcohol in my veins, I noticed the deep, cold lake and the 10-degree air. It was painful to stay still. Moving was my only way not to freeze. After dinner, before any of the crew got back to work, a rotund union guy came over to me and said, "I'm bumping you." By the look of bewilderment on my face, he realized I had no idea what he was talking about and continued, "I'm taking your place, go home." He had a very disrespectful manner, so I wanted to resist doing what he asked, but I was exhausted and glad to be done. There was no way I was going to quit before the job was done, and this gave me a way out. I gathered my stuff and was climbing the stairs out of the hold when a couple of guys I had worked with all day said, "Where are you going?" "A union guy bumped me." "No way. He's not going to stay home drinking beer and watching TV and then bump you just to get your overtime pay." I protested, "It's okay, really, guys. Let's not start something my first day out." They were all talking. No one heard me. One said, "I'm going to tell the other guys," and bolted. Within minutes, everyone on the boat was gathered up on the deck and yelling. I was frightened. I thought, great, the first day a woman works on the boats and there is trouble. A few guys came and escorted me to the deck, saying, "Sit here and don't move." I was scared by the bully in the hall, but this was truly terrifying. I was imagining a union guy throwing me overboard, remembering being told the mafia ran the longshoremen union. Then I saw a serious-looking guy walking up the plank onto the boat, yelling, "What the hell is going on here?" A guy who worked across the hold from me stepped up and said, "She worked hard all day, while some union guy sat on his butt and he thought he was going to come here and take her overtime pay? No way." There was shouting back and forth until someone shouted, "If she goes, we all sit down and you don't get this boat out of here." The crowd behind him yelled, "Right!" The boss yelled, "Okay, shut up, you guys." He looked through the crowd and said, "How could such a little thing get anything done? You guys want her around because she's something to look at." My heart hesitated to beat while waiting for some response. Actually, one of the biggest guys said, "She gets work done. She carried 2 of the twine bales at once all day long. She's about the only one still getting anything done around here. Let's get back to work and see if we can keep up with her." There was more discussion at a lower volume before the big boss turned and walked down the plank. We all went back to work until 10:30, when the ship was fully unloaded. At home, I soaked in hot water, still feeling the ship swaying beneath me. Even though all my muscles hurt, I laughed thinking about how the guys who had been described as animals stood up for me. Animals respect each other, I thought. People can be the confusing ones, like the bullies, but the fair people outnumber them. Many people treat others well. We should walk away from those who do not. They stood up for what was right for a stranger. I was delighted it was such a positive experience. I was proud of the stevedores, the day I became a stevedores on the unsalted sea. Wow. Well, that story was very happy-making to remember that. Yeah, these guys that had been described as animals, they were just decent human beings who wanted to talk about flowers and gardening and poetry, and they were so relieved there was a woman there so they didn't just have to talk about hockey and broads and politics. Of course, they wouldn't admit that among the other guys, but it was obvious. So that was a beautiful experience. So here's, I'm very happy with, these are smaller SVGs, these bigger, the SVGs can be printed any size we want. So these are smaller than the first set of cards I did and the thing that I put on a lot of clothing. And I like it. I like this size. It's real nice. Are there any comments or questions you saved? Yes.
On YouTube, MMM said, "Your stories have such a strong voice. You write in your own voice. How did you get to that level of authenticity? Does that take lots of editing and rewriting?"
Well, thank you. That's a kind thing to say. And my belief is, and I've heard far more educated, literate, accomplished writers and editors and such publishers say our own voice is the most powerful way we can write, speak, communicate. So my very first and only workshop I did to see if I could write with Lev Coutier, a very excellent, accomplished writer and editor of some major magazines. I thought, well, I'm just going to write what comes to my mind, let it pour, bring it to this workshop without, much editing, if any, and see if it's something that's natural for me. And I almost, part of me hoped that the answer was no, because then I wouldn't have to write my stories, somebody else could write them. But I went to the workshop, read my story, and she said, you have what every writer wants, your own voice. And so the answer to your question is just tell your truth. Tell what's in your heart and mind. Write it without caring about sentence structure or being eloquent. Just tell it. Just write it. And find your voice that isn't worried about impressing others, but just tell the story or communicate the thing you want to communicate and get comfortable with that. And for me, I did ask Noelle Oxenhandler, a professor at Sonoma State for the literature courses, to edit my stories, and she almost changed nothing. And I was a little disappointed that I paid her to edit and there was so little editing. And she said, that's your voice. There's no reason to change it. She changed a couple things. And one of them was very interesting for me. I did read Gertrude Stein, and her repeating things got in there. And I repeated a few things, and Noelle noticed that and said, you know, you're not Gertrude Stein. That is not you. That's something you took on from someone, a writer you respect. So I stopped doing that. She was right. And so as far as editing, my writing style, what is natural for me is very just straight out of my heart. And like I don't have scripts for these virtual visit live streams. I just speak my truth and try to communicate clearly what I'm feeling. And that's how I write. And so there actually is not much editing. There is some, and I'm a terrible spelling. And sometimes I have I didn't learn to write in school. I didn't read. So, it can be rough. And so there is some editing that's necessary to make it clearer. And I did have a professional editor edit my memoir. But once again, she didn't change much. And I said to her, I just want it to be clear. I don't. That's all. And so my way is just tell it and find your voice, become comfortable with who you are, how you feel, and don't worry about the editing and all of that. Just be passionate about what you want to share.
All right, let's read the last question, and then it's 108. Just
Okay.
FYI. The Lone Gun 91 on YouTube said, loved that story. I could listen to your lake stories all day. How do you plan out the writing process? Do you structure your stories or just let it flow onto the page?
I first, when I committed to writing my memoir, I decided that the theme was epiphanies, things in my life that I'd gone through that I learned something important from, and that other people could potentially see something, feel something important from. So I chose those events that qualified as an epiphany, a broadening of my perspective. And then I try to tell it in as few words as possible. And I am, I have my own way. Everybody has their own way. And my way is to come up with a title first, most of the time, because the title is the most distilled version of the story. And if I have the title, I know I have really distilled the essence of the story to its most refined form, the title. And then okay, what are the moments in this story that really tell that story? And I list them either in my mind or sometimes I write them down. And then I go about telling that, trying to bring the reader audience into that story by describing those moments in the story that share it. And I try not to go off on tangents about inconsequential things. The color of the shirt the bully was wearing, who cares? The day of the week, nobody cares. So I try to just tell the story. And that's that. Does that answer it? All right. Well, thank you very much for being here. I love sharing these stories. I love sharing the meditative, soothing art while hearing. That first story was heavy duty, but I stayed peaceful through it. Partly because creativity has given me that serenity, and that's what I want to share with you. So hopefully you are inspired to explore your own imagination and express your own creativity, and come back on Mondays and Thursdays, noon Central Time, and tell a friend, and like and comment and subscribe on YouTube and all that good stuff. And I really appreciate you being here. Okay, and thank you, Bodhi, for all your technical help and encouragement. And thanks for all the great comments and questions, all of you. And there we go. Anything else? All right. Well, meanwhile, stay creative.